Strength builds are some of the most crushing builds that you can make in Elden Ring, quite literally. And today we're going to be deep diving into 3 different builds that you can become the ultimate Elden Ring giga chad. And as always, we're going to be providing the best weapons, talismans and armor sets that you need to flatten every enemy in the game. The stats for all builds are pretty much going to be the same throughout, so we'll cover the stats and the buffs at the end. But there are so many builds that could have made the list, but these are just 3 of my personal favourites. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button to not miss any future content, and it really does help me out a lot. But let's get into the build. First up, we have an absolute menace of a build which will just straight up dominate every enemy in the game. The weapon we are using are the rusted anchor. Not one, but 2 of these. Now these may look old and useless, but don't be fooled, these oversized fishing hooks can pack a hell of a punch. We are going to be equipping 2 of these, so for this one we'll need New Game Plus. The weapon is obtainable by killing the scaly misbegotten boss in the Morn Tunnel shown here on the map. Once we have 2 of these, we want to add the Cragblade Ash of War to both of them, which will cover the weapons in stone, dealing devastating damage. Having 2 of these also allows us to use the power stance jump attack, which just swings these 2 beasts into the enemy and it will deal insane physical and stance damage, which is bloody lovely. For the armor for this build, we're going to be running the Raptor's Feather armor set, which will increase our damage with our jump attacks. An alternative would be the Graveyard's Blackquill armor set, which gives the same buff, but I just prefer the look of the Raptor set. Finally, for Gauntlets and Greaves and Helm, we're going the Rakshasa set, which will give us a 2% boost to our damage per item, so in this case we're having 6% damage increase. The talismans for this build can be played around with quite a lot, so feel free to swap out any of these which you just want to go for. But for me, I went for the Ritual Sword talisman, which will boost our damage by 10% when our HP is at full. Next up, I went for the Rotten Wing Sword insignia. This is one that you can swap out, but I'm going for this because some attacks are going to be sent over and over and over again. And this talisman will simply boost our damage with successive attacks. Next up, we've gone for the Old Lord's talisman, and this will boost the duration of our buffs by 30%. And our final talisman is the Claw talisman, which is pretty much vital to this build. And this will boost our attack power when using the jump attacks, and again this will work perfectly with our power stance jump attack here. Having the ability to increase our main attack with all the talismans really is what makes this build one of the best. For the flask, we're going for the Thorny Crack tier. Again, we're going to try and boost the successive attacks here, and also the Stone Barb tier, which will increase the chances of breaking the stance of our enemies, allowing for those sweet criticals. A good alternative would be the Green Burst talisman, which will just simply increase our stamina recovery, and with all the jump attacks that we're doing, it's going to be drained constantly, so it might be a good option. One final note for this build as you watch me destroy some of the DLC bosses is that this build looks absolutely outrageous with these 2 massive weapons, but it was extremely fun to play with this one. If you are looking for a fun and OP build to try, then this is the one for you. Moving on to our next build, we have possibly the strongest strength weapon to come from the DLC. The weapon can be obtained by defeating Commander Gaius in Mesmer's back garden and trading the remembrance in at the Round Table Hold. We're of course talking about the Sword Lance, a massive thrusting sword which hits like an absolute truck. The most common way of using this weapon is by using the guard counters, and that's exactly what we're going to focus on with this build. By combining the right talismans and the flask tiers, we can make this into one of the best guard countering builds in the entire game. Even if you aren't going to want a guard counter, then this weapon can still prove to be amazing even with Ash of War such as Impaling Thrust. But for this build we're going to add Cragblade Ash of War and we're going to add it to the Heavy Affinity. The talismans we're going to be using for this one are going to be the Two-Handed Talisman, which is a new one to the DLC, and this will boost our attacks by 15% when two-handing the weapon. The Curved Sword Talisman is up next, which increases our guard counter damage by 20%, which is just perfect for this build. The Blade of Mercy, another new one, which will increase our attack power by 20% for 20 seconds after a critical hit. And finally, the Spear Talisman, which increases our thrust and counter attack damage by 15%. It's important to know that this stacks with our other talismans, such as the Curved Sword and the Two-Handed Talisman. For our Flask of Wondrous Physic on this one, we're going to be using the Deflecting tier. This will minimise the damage received in some cases, but more importantly, it will increase our damage output based on the amount of deflections you get before using the guard counter, so stance breaks are going to be happening a lot. The other we're going to be using is the Green Burst Crystal tier. As the guard countering builds, we'll be burning away our stamina when blocking the enemy attacks, so having something to increase our stamina recovery speed is pretty much vital. The armor for this one is completely up to you. There are armor sets which can increase your damage, such as the Rakshasa set, but I've gone for a variety of pieces just to give a sort of Dark Knight look. but overall this build offers you something completely different from the others. Whereas the others are all about pure strength and overpowering your enemy, this is more about being tactical and when to use the guard counter and things like that. You need to look for opportunities to deal tons of damage to the enemy. For our final build on the list, we're looking at an absolute classic. We're going to take a look at the Greatsword Build. This weapon can be found very early on in the base game and will carry any strength user through the entire game with ease. Pair this with the Lion's Claw Ash of War and you have an amazing strength build already. This weapon can be found here on the map and you can follow this route to get to it. This weapon just has great range along with A scaling with strength. And Lion's Claw isn't the best damaging base option, but the skill is just so goddamn easy to use. Simply press L2 and your character is already halfway through the air, hurling himself through the target. As soon as you start the animation, you simply aren't going to get hit out of it either. Pretty much every strike will go through enemy attacks. This, along with the stance damage this weapon offers, is just the ultimate Giga Chad build. Hit your way through everything and just don't care about getting hit, that's the plan. But of course we want to make this even stronger and the talismans for this build do just that. Starting with the first talisman for this build, we're going to be using the Shard of Alexander, which will just simply increase our weapon skill, and Lion's Claw is going to be our main attack with this build. Next up again, we're going to be using the two-handed talisman, just to boost our two-handed attacks. Another one we're using is the Ritual Sword talisman, just to boost our damage again. And finally, we're going with the Green Turtle talisman, just to boost our stamina recovery speed. For our Flask of Wondrous Physic for this one, we're going to be using the Stone Barb tier again, just to increase our chances of getting stance breaks. And we're going to pair this with a Stamina tier again, like the Green Burst tier, or we can even boost our damage further and add the Blood Sucking Crack tier. A good alternative would be the Opaline Hard tier, which will just increase our damage negation, and this will be great if you're just going with plan A and hurling yourself straight at the enemy head first. Now the stats for these builds can be played around with quite a lot, as the strength stat works differently depending on whether you're two-handing the weapon or not. But for these builds, I use the following stats. For Vigor, we're going for a 50, which I would recommend for every single build that you make as a minimum. You are going to be thrown around a lot when you're up close and personal with the boss, so you need high Vigor to take those hits and stay in the fight. Mind, we just need a 17. Endurance, this is at 40, this is pretty vital for all the builds, as the stamina drain on strength build is real. If you don't manage it correctly, you will constantly find yourself out of stamina. For strength, we're going for 80. Obviously this being our main stat, but as mentioned before, you can play around with this and lower it if you are two-handing the weapons. Dexterity at 12, Intelligence at 7, and for Faith we're going for 25. We'll need enough to use our buffs for the build, which in this case are going to be Golden Vow, which will provide us with an increase to our physical attack power, and also provide us with damage negation. The next incantation will be the Flame Grant Me Strength incantation, which will give us an additional increase to our attack power. And there you have it guys, those are 3 of the best strength builds that you can make in Elden Ring right now. Thank you for all the support on the channel recently, and if you guys have enjoyed this video, please tap the like button, and if you want to see more Elden Ring videos and RPG content, hit the subscribe button. Catch you in the next one fellas.